I wanted to address a couple of things that are recent. The first thing I want to talk about is the fact that I was trespassed from the courthouse recently. And the sheriff's department told me that I was trespassed because Judge Weimer stated that I was in contempt, that I was recording inside the courtroom, when we all know that the sheriff's department screened every person twice before going into the courtroom, and they make up this false allegation that I was recording in the courtroom, and they tell me that Judge Weimer held you in contempt and that you are removed from the courthouse. You're no longer able to be present at any of Mustafa's hearings. And I go to the sheriff, Glenn Hill. I have a conversation with him. He says, talk to me, tell me what's going on. And, you know, I'm a fair person. I'm going to listen to the facts. And, you know, I might let you back into the courthouse. Maybe this is a misunderstanding. So I go into the office, the sheriff's office. I tell Glenn Hill that I was not recording. I tell him that the dash camera that Blake Weimer told me to bring in as evidence was screened by the sheriff's office, by the sheriff's department. It was put through the scanner, the x-ray scanner, 2 times. Okay? We took a break inside of court, and I went outside, and I went back into the courthouse again with this box of the dash camera, which the sheriff's deputies took, put it through the x-ray machine, and physically handed it to me on the other side. In the courtroom, the same process. They had an x-ray machine set up on that day, and they took this dash camera, they inspected the box, they inspected the inside of the box, and they physically handed me this dash camera that I told them in advance that this was evidence being used in Mustafa's motion to dismiss. Now, 2 weeks later, I get trespassed for bringing in this item. And I talked to the sheriff's department. I talked to Sheriff Glenn Hill himself, and he listens to the facts. I tell him that your deputies allowed this camera, this dash camera, that's not operational, by the way, because the dash camera has to be connected into a 12-volt source, like a car cigarette lighter outlet for it to be operational, and that's not possible inside of the courtroom. Okay, now Glenn Hill tells me before Mustafa's hearing, so the hearing that we're talking about is where Mustafa's attorney, Blake Weimer, was going to be withdrawing from the case, and Judge Weimer was going to be assigning Mustafa a new attorney. Okay, the conversation I had with Sheriff Glenn Hill was about me being able to be present in the courtroom when this process took place. When Judge Weimer is about to extend Mustafa's trial, and he's about to assign a new court-appointed lawyer. Okay? Now, on the day of court, I show up to the courthouse, and I assumed that Glenn Hill was going to make his decision that morning and tell me, yes, you can be in the courtroom. I reviewed the facts. There's no way you could have recorded inside the courtroom. My deputies allowed this item to go into the courtroom, and it was not a fault of yours. It was a fault of the police department, the sheriff's department, that if they did not want this item in the courtroom, they should have never allowed it in. Even though they've scanned it through the x-ray machine 4 times, even though they inspected all of my belongings and they physically handed me my belongings inside of the courtroom. And I assumed that Sheriff Glenn Hill was going to be an honest person, that based on the facts, he was going to let me enter the courtroom to be present during Mustafa's hearings. But that morning, Glenn Hill tells his secretary that I'm not allowed to be in the courtroom. And when I questioned it, I said, well, we spoke to Glenn Hill. He said that he was going to allow me in the courtroom. He says, no, the sheriff says you're not allowed to be in the courtroom. Okay. Later that afternoon, I come across Sheriff Glenn Hill, and I ask him, you know, I thought you said you're a fair person, that you're going to look at the facts with regards to this trespass, and because we're having a serious conversation, that you're going to look at the facts really, and you're going to allow me to be present in my brother's hearing. And he says, no, you can't be in today's hearing, and you can't be in the next hearing. And he says the next hearing is nothing. It's the following Thursday, you know, and all the judge is doing is he's going to select a trial date for your brother. So the first hearing that I was not allowed to be in was when Judge Weimer assigned a court-appointed lawyer for Mustafa. And the second hearing that Glenn Hill specifically says, you can't be in this specific hearing, but I promise you after this hearing, you can be at all of your brother's hearings. And I'm thinking, that doesn't make sense. Why am I not allowed to be in that hearing where the judge is going to assign an attorney for Mustafa, and I can't be in the hearing where the judge is going to assign a court date for Mustafa's trial? What is so special about these two hearings that I can't be there? What is so special? Okay? Well, we find out now, through information of people that were in the courtroom and court records, because this is the Circuit Court of Prince William County. So Circuit Court means everything is on the records. There's a court reporter that documents everything being said by the judge, by the lawyers, by the prosecutors. Everything is documented, okay? And we find out that Judge Weimer had actually called his friend of 30 years. Imagine, a judge calls up his attorney friend and tells him, you're not on the list for court-appointed attorneys, but I want you to specifically take this case. I mean, we expect judges in America, in the judicial system, to be impartial. They can't have their finger on the scale, whether it's for the prosecutor or whether it's for the defendant. In this case, the judge himself admits on the record in the courtroom, the same courtroom that I was not allowed to be present in. They don't want anybody in this courtroom. Remember, they've trespassed me, they've trespassed my mother, they've trespassed my sister and my older brother. They've essentially trespassed half of my family from being in the courtroom. And any stranger, any citizen that wants to be in this courtroom is not allowed, because the sheriff's deputies at the door will ask these people, what is your business being in this courtroom? Okay? And if a person is a little bit hesitant, they'll push them aside and tell them, you're not allowed to be here. This is a private setting. You're not allowed to be here. This is not a public hearing any longer. But we find out, back to the topic, we find out that Judge Carol Weimer, a circuit judge of Prince William County, Virginia, has phone called his best friend of 30 years, an attorney, to specifically take on Mustafa's case. And then in the following hearing that I was not allowed to be in, we find out that Judge Weimer admits on the record that he had a private conversation with this attorney. And he states it on the record. He says, you know, I want to make it clear for the record that I had a private conversation with Mustafa's court-appointed attorney that I had requested to specifically take on this case, even though he's not a attorney listed on the court's list. And he says we had a conversation about Mustafa's court security. I question that. Number one, it's not the judge's responsibility of the court security. The security of the courtroom really is the responsibility of the sheriff's department. So if there was any security concerns with Mustafa's hearings, this is a sheriff's department issue where they would be contacting the attorney. Judge Weimer denied Mustafa bond after granting him bond a week prior. Okay? In April, Mustafa had a bond hearing, April of 2024. Mustafa had a bond hearing where this judge gave Mustafa a $5,000 bond on 6 felony counts, 4 of them being murder. And this judge looked at the evidence and said, this man deserves bond after reviewing the evidence of $5,000. Okay? So for $500, Mustafa was going to be released, not on house arrest, not on any restrictions. He was just going to be released on bond. Okay? And when the prosecutor threatened the judge with her demeanor, she basically threatened the judge and told him that the Commonwealth attorney is not going to be happy with you about this decision. Okay? I'm ordering that you give a 1-week stay so that I can ask the Court of Appeals how long it would take for the prosecutor to file an appeal on this $5,000 bond. Okay? And the judge granted that. After pressure from this prosecutor, it was an awkward silence inside the courtroom, and the judge caved in. He gave her the 1-week stay that she wanted so that the following Friday she could notify him how long it would take for the Court of Appeals to hear this case out. Okay? To hear her appeal on the $5,000 bond that he issued. Okay? Only a week later, for the same judge, Judge Carol Weimer, to allow the prosecutor not to tell him how long it would take for the Court of Appeals, but to actually retry the bond motion that day. And this judge allowed it. Despite the rules, despite the law, despite his own ruling, he allowed this prosecutor to bring in a false narrative about Mustafa allegedly threatening a correctional officer, telling her that he's going to sue her when he's released. Okay? And this judge says, I'm reversing my decision and I'm denying him bond. And then a month or so later, the same judge seals off all of the body cams, all of the evidence, not only from us, not only from me, the power of attorney, not from the community, but he also seals all the evidence from Mustafa. Imagine, a judge gives an order for the defendant not to be able to view any of the discovery material in his case. Okay? He basically told Mustafa, you're sitting in a cage, I'm going to keep you in this cage, and you're not allowed to review the allegations against you. You're not allowed to defend yourself. Okay? And now, months later, here we are, the same judge is phone calling his best friend, who's not listed on the court-appointed list by the courts, who's not authorized by the courts, who hasn't been vetted by the courts. He calls this lawyer to personally take on this case. Is he doing it for free? We don't know. He's not on the list. So who's paying this lawyer? And I'll remind you, the lawyer that told Mustafa, I'm going to see you, hasn't seen him. Told Mustafa's brother, I'm going to talk to you, hasn't talked to him. A lawyer that is unresponsive, that, we can't really judge at this point. But so far, it's not looking so good. Okay? I mean, this whole situation really stinks. This whole situation stinks to high hell. Okay? You have a judge who's putting his finger on the scale. We known from past history of this judge that he has ruled against the evidence. He has ruled in the Commonwealth attorney's favor without evidence. Okay? And when Mustafa's attorney at the time files a motion to reconsider for bond, the judge says, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. I'm not going to give my reasons as to why I'm denying bond, but I have my personal reasons, and I'm not going to give them. I mean, as a defendant, you should be allowed to know why the judge is denying your bond so that your attorney can come up with a defense. But if the judge is telling you you're indefensible, I'm not going to give you the reasons for my denial, that means there's no way for you to come out. There's no way for you to even come up with a defense to the allegation, because I'm not going to tell you what the allegations are. They're in my mind. And we know that's against the law. Okay? Now, I'm thinking, why did they trespass me specifically? I'll tell you why. When Mustafa was being up inside the jail, I filed 2 civil injunctions to get the FOIA videos released from the jail, which they've denied. I filed a civil injunction in the General District Court, which I appealed to the Circuit Court, and it was not successful. I filed another one in the General District Court, also appealed to the Circuit Court. That wasn't successful. I filed 2 civil injunctions to get Mustafa medical help in the Prince William County Circuit Court. Those were unsuccessful. I helped Mustafa file a federal lawsuit with a injunction relief at the federal level. That was unsuccessful because the judge blocked it. They claimed that I don't have the right to help Mustafa file a case. Even though he was filing the case, they still denied it. Okay? And I also helped Mustafa file his Department of Justice complaints. I also helped him file his complaints with the police department with regards to investigator Robert Drum falsifying the warrant, falsifying that 30-minute conversation. So we know that this judge, who actually listened to these injunctions that I filed at Prince William County, he knows how much I advocate for my brother. He knows that out of Mustafa's family members, that I'm the one that's going to go in and help him legally file cases or complaints to the government. So what do? They block me from entering the courtroom because they know that if I hear the judge saying, I personally called my best friend to take on this case, who's not on the list for Prince William County, who's not on the list for court-appointed lawyers, the judge basically called his best friend to do the job for the prosecutor. Okay? And now we hear that the judge is having private conversations with his best friend, and the prosecutor sitting on the other side is not complaining that the judge is having conversations with the defendant's attorney. I mean, we know there's something going on here. Something is at play here, and it stinks. It stinks. It stinks really bad. Okay? So, you know, we go back again to the law. Okay? Mustafa has a constitutional right. Mustafa has the right to due process, and he has the right to have a judge who's impartial. A judge that has no interest in the prosecutor's side or the defendant's side. And we know where this judge, based on his prior rulings, based on his denials of Mustafa getting medical treatment, based on the judge's demeanor when he laughed, when Mustafa told him, Your Honor, they beat me in the jail. And the judge left. Okay? So we know there's something going on here. And I think that this judge putting this conversation on the record, admitting ahead of time that, yes, I had communications with the attorney. He's alleging that he had communications with regards to security. I think it's BS. And I'll call it out. It's BS. He knows, this judge knows, that when the DOJ investigates this case and they find out that Judge Weimer had communication with this attorney, he's giving an alibi ahead of time because he knows it's going to come out at some point. This judge, he knows we're not going to let this go. Okay? We're not going to let this go because it's corruption at the highest levels. I mean, where in America do you have a judge who we know is not impartial? We know that this judge is always ruling for the Commonwealth, and we don't know if he's ruling because he's being blackmailed. We don't know if he's being threatened by the Commonwealth attorney. We don't know what's really the relationship between Judge Carol Weimer and Amy Ashworth. We don't know what they have against each other. But the looks that the prosecutor is giving this judge during these motions, I mean, you can't deny that there's something going on between the physical appearance of this prosecutor when she's asking the judge to do something, and the judge gives her these weird looks, and then she gives him these weird looks back, and then he rules back in her favor. We know that this judge has practiced law from the bench because at one of the civil injunctions, the judge actually gives the jail's attorney the answer she needs to file in the courts. And that's not allowed because now he's a lawyer practicing law from the bench. We no longer have a judge in the courtroom. When the judge is giving advice to the opposing party, he's no longer a judge. He's an attorney. And we have no judge in the courtroom. And that's what happened with the civil injunctions when I was trying to get Mustafa emergency medical help. And by the way, I wasn't asking for much. I was asking for Mustafa to be transferred to a medical facility to get medical treatment. And the judge said, no, we're not going to do that. I was asking for the judge to review the footage, the CCTV footage for May 24th? And the judge said no. We were asking this judge to be impartial. And we know that Mustafa will never get a fair trial with Judge Carol Weimer, because this judge has already presented himself as an attorney, as a prosecutor, and this has to be addressed. This issue has to be addressed. You cannot have a judge have his best friend in the courtroom. I mean, he's got the Commonwealth attorney, who's his best friend, and now he has his best friend representing Mustafa. We know it's not representation. We know that this is a miscarriage of justice, and we demand answers. We demand answers.